Hey guys and gals, Never here from Drakewing Gaming, and 70 on Twitter, the Gaming Dragon. Today I'm coming back at you another Let's Play episode of Beasts of the Thorns. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump right back into it, shall we? Alarm chain, you are up, and let's go. Yep, right there. Alrighty. Potato chips are innocent. That's a weird way to start the episode. Okay. But in front of the hunter with poor grades, it's torture just to dangle it. If you can't have chips, then you can have the cake. Sooner or later you'll be guillotined by the other members. Try to eat as much as you can. I've calculated an extra portion. The president's arrival is truly timely. This is definitely more than just one extra portion. Amor couldn't help but comment. 2 more slices of cake were added to his plate by Bjorn. Ultimately, we still couldn't finish the food, but as class time approached, Chris had to abandon his plate of tater tots and fries to go shower. Ostrom volunteered to handle the kitchen and urged us to go to class. Meanwhile, he casually scrolled through his phone, chewing the remaining food at his leisure. I had no doubt he could finish all the food. Bjorn washed his hands, opened his designated cabinet, and retrieved several textbooks. He pondered which reference book was used this year, ultimately deciding to take them all. None of us had bought our books yet, so for now, we went to class empty-handed. The 4 of us traversed the campus, and Bjorn led us towards the Humanities College, where along the way, many students dressed in elaborate costumes headed in the opposite direction, presumably preparing for some festival. As a few coyote-like girls passed by, they glanced at us, whispering amongst themselves. Amor flashed them a toothy smile while eliciting a shy laughter. I sighed inwardly. You all fell for Amor's appearance deception. The number of girls who ended up crying because of his fox wasn't less than a dozen. Amor is very popular. No, they weren't initially targeting me. Those coyotes only became interested in me after Bjorn recognized us as Wild Hunt members. Bjorn grinned. When we say fraternities are the stars of the campus, it's not just a self-aggrandizing jingle. While most people join fraternities looking for recommendations, others come for the chicks they attract. Some of the members have a busy nightlife in their private lives. Bjorn squinted at me. But with most members juggling school and the fraternity, there's no time for fun and games. After all, hunting success is hard to come by, and as you can see, the fraternity's training facilities are full almost every day, so no one dares to slack off on their independent training. Very much like the sports team at the Human University on the other side. You also need to keep up with the training schedule. Your first hunt is very important. Apart from the grand hunt, the first hunt is the most highly anticipated individual performance. When Ostrom had his first hunt years ago, he teamed up with Lucas and delivered overwhelming results. The previous president immediately appointed him as the next president. It caused quite a stir in the news at the time. It's going to be on the news. At that time, there were so many reporters trying to squeeze through the fraternity house's gates just to interview Ostrom and Lucas. Even I got some attention, despite being ranked only as the 4th in the Scouts. The Outer Realms were lacking news, so Ostrom was like a freshly baked quenelle to the reporters, quite sought after. Ostrom also knew how to maintain good relationships with the reporters, so he was portrayed as a heroic figure persecuted by the council. This caused headaches for the council, leaving them powerless. Isn't Ostrom a great nobleman? Their family should have a seat on the council, right? Oh, you'll come to know this gradually. The intricacies of our council run deep. Besides, the political influence of the nobility is also gradually declining. The nouveau riche and the leaders of the guilds understand politics better than those stagnant aristocrats. Without further ado, let me tell you that it's absolutely right to support Boss Ostrom, who personifies the spirit of the fraternity. I don't agree with Bjorn in my heart, but I don't say so. Hey, why don't you tell me about the next class? Instead of me saying it, why don't you experience it for yourselves? Professor Grin's lectures are something that every student at the Outer Limits Academy must experience. Big Bear playfully kept the answer to himself. I sighed inwardly. That expression definitely wasn't a good sign. Before long, we arrived at the cluster of buildings in the Humanities College. Whether it was a misconception or not, the students around the Humanities College exuded an elegant intellectual aura. The quaint shops along the street also emitted a refined historical atmosphere. The outdoor wooden cafes are filled with students quietly studying, a stark contrast to the atmosphere of the engineering college. We crossed the courtyard and entered the building with a circular dome. Today's lecture was held in a large lecture hall with a podium as the center of the circle and stepped arcs of seating extending to the rear. Because of the building's acoustic structure, the words of the person on the podium could be transmitted clearly to the entire classroom without the aid of additional loudspeakers. The lecture hall was nearly full, and no one spoke in silence as everyone took out their reference books and notebooks and waited for the professor to come in. Because we came late, the back rows of the auditorium were full, so we had to sit in the front seats. I don't like it when students sit in the back row. I whispered my complaint to Amor, and the fox made a throat-slitting gesture. How bad could it be? I've also suffered under terrible professors at the Human University, he replied with a shrug. Oh wow, that's an interesting-looking character. As the floor trembled slightly, a massive figure stooped into the lecture hall. A well-dressed troll. In my impression, humans always describe trolls as foolish and clumsy, so I was quite surprised to see a troll professor. The professor adjusted his thick-framed glasses and began writing extensively on the blackboard without saying a word, while the students in the lecture hall silently copied down the key points. I carefully read the words on the blackboard. The professor was very earnest, but the amount of information was immense. The history of the Outer Realms. Amor whispered reverently. But it's too detailed, isn't it? I didn't study the history of mankind in such detail. That's because demons are big on tradition and history. Bjorn finally determined which reference book to use this year. He opened the thick book, its pages pristine without any handwritten notes or annotations, indicating it had seen little use. Professor Grin's chalkboard depicted a linear chart starting from the most recent history. The Outer Realm has never welcomed outsiders since ancient times, and it has always been subject to invasion. It has endured 6 invasions by foreign colonizers, 4 of which resulted in serious conflicts with the indigenous monsters. However, due to the complex terrain, the Outer Realm has never been completely conquered. In the last conflict, however, the boundary of the Outer Realm was breached, and the monster king McClear was slain single-handedly by the human wizard Prince William Espagne, resulting in the total defeat of the monsters. The humans crossed the treacherous barrier of the northern mountains, and their army approached the capital city of Phineas, on the verge of total collapse. But at that moment, the humans' unstoppable offensive was halted by dragons. The dragons forced humans to sign a peace treaty, ending the war in exchange for the submission of the monsters. Since then, the Outer Realm became an autonomous territory under the Human Federation. The last human-monster war was also taught in my high school history textbook, which was easy to understand. However, the earlier history of ancient monster conflicts was bewildering, with various monsters warring among themselves, and various grudges and alliances. Gradually, the eastern monster kingdoms were wiped out by humans one after another. The Outer Realm, originally unwilling to accept outsiders, continuously sheltered monsters fleeing westward, leading to the diversity of monster races in modern times. The professor began to dissect the key points of each historical event. His speech was clear and logical, but he spoke at a rapid pace. I hurriedly took notes, but still couldn't keep up with the rapid-fire lecture of the troll professor. What's worse, I finally understood why everyone sat in the back rows. Professor Grin loved to call on students to express their opinions, but unfortunately the old troll's eyesight wasn't very good, so he only chose students from the front rows. Amor was called upon twice. He eloquently talked his way through, even on topics he didn't understand. Where do you get the knowledge to respond to the professor's questions? I lowered my voice and reproached Amor mournfully. Pre-reading, isn't that the basics? Amor gives a signature questioning look that makes me feel like my intelligence is being insulted. I don't believe you're going to be able to prep. We're too busy to read these days. I protested slightly louder, and Professor Mountain Monster coughed deliberately. The student in the helmet seems to have some knowledge of the Parth's history of colonizing the Outlands, doesn't he? Is there anything you'd like to share? My heart is racing and I'm in a cold sweat. I looked helplessly to my friends for help. Chris looked equally helplessly back at me, and Bjorn was dozing off in a seated position. Only Amor was silently sending me messages with the shape of his mouth. At that moment, I desperately wished for resonance with Amor, rather than just weak resonance. I tried hard to decipher Amor's lip movements, hoping to understand his signals.
The Parth tribe suffered significant losses due to the plague, because at that time humans had no resistance to the diseases of the outer realm. The professor stared at me non-committally. It was the most basic knowledge on the books, and there was no way to satisfy him. Amor exaggerated his expressions to signal me. Darn it, I don't understand foxlip language. It's completely different from how humans speak. Is it some kind of fever? Milan fever? A sudden realization struck me. I believe that the plague that wiped out the Parth tribe may have had a common ancestral virus strain with modern Malin fever. The professor lowered his glasses and scrutinized me with his eyes, making me feel incredibly uneasy.
Very well. This student's hypothesis is quite bold and interesting, worthy of our consideration. However, until archaeology makes progress, we must maintain a skeptical attitude towards every hypothesis. Let's continue examining the remains of the Parth settlements in the Outer Realm.
The old professor turned his attention back to the class. It's a relief to me. Amor, thank you. You're quite good at storytelling, too, but unfortunately the timing of the Parth extinction predates the Milan fever pandemic by about 2,000 years. How am I supposed to know these things? This is my first time learning about the history of magical creatures, and I'm a human. I'm a human, and No, God. Amor's expression stiffens. I mean, I used to be human. Uh-huh. Amor absent-mindedly brushed me off, his gaze returning to the blackboard. I felt a bit frustrated after all. After all, it had only been 2 weeks since I was human, so a slip of the tongue should be understandable, right? But Amor seemed to mind it a lot. Perhaps it's disappointment that I haven't been able to develop a sense of self-identity with magical creatures. After all, unlike pure magical creatures, my subconscious still identifies itself as human. It's not easy to change a self-identity that's been cultivated over 20 years. Chris, who was sitting next to me, was focused on the lesson, but he grabbed my hand under the desk and gave it a subtle reassuring shake with his big paw. I secretly thanked him with the resonance. Chris's ears flicked and he didn't give me an answer, but his paw still held my hand and didn't let go. He's left-handed anyway, so I let him hold my right hand without interfering with his note-taking. But in the end, I let go of Chris's hand. Because our big bear finally fell asleep to oblivion and let out a loud snore. Professor Grin shook his head, picked up his chalk and dropped it so accurately on Bjorn's forehead that the bear jumped in fright and fell out of his chair. With the eyes of the class on us, I rushed to free myself from Chris's claws.
Mr. Bjorn, I don't want to give you any more F's on your transcripts, but would it be possible for you to please focus on your classes so that I can give you a pass on this course?
The class let out a low, snickering laugh, but Bjorn himself looked unconcerned, scratching the spot where he'd been hit by the chalk and smiling nervously. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and pause it right there. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and that notification bell. I love you all, and I shall see you on the next video. Bye-bye!